Welcome. My name's Ian McLean. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, and I want to thank you all for attending this candidate forum for the riding of Kitchener-Conestoga. The Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce takes our political process very seriously and our role in it. We are a nonpartisan organization and work with all elected officials municipally, provincially, and federally. These candidate forums are an important opportunity for our members and the community at large to hear about issues of concern and importance to the business community and the community as a whole. This is the final of 4 events organized by the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce in advance of the October 21st federal election. We've held on Monday a forum for the Waterloo riding. Tuesday was Kitchener Centre. Yesterday we were in Kitchener South Hespeler and held that in Cambridge City Hall, and this will be the final one today. We want to thank our friends at 570 News. They've been great partners of ours in doing both provincial and federal candidate forums over the last number of years, and in particular to our good friend James Sebastian Scott for agreeing to moderate all 4 of these forums. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to James, who's the Master of Ceremonies and in charge for the day. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. The format for this event will be 90-second introductory remarks from each candidate, followed by questions in priority areas identified by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce through their advisory committees and responses from the membership at large. The questions will be asked in rotation, and the moderator reserves the right to terminate answers where appropriate. Also, after all candidates have answered a particular question, a candidate can ask for a rebuttal on the comments made by any one of the other participants. The moderator reserves discretion on whether to allow the rebuttal and also terminate the discussion when required. Also, if you can keep in mind, answers will be kept to 60 seconds. If you need to finish your thought, I'll allow it, and then we'll move on to the next candidate. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for closing remarks, which will proceed in reverse order from opening remarks. We'll now commence with 90-second opening remarks. The candidate order, as determined this afternoon, is Riani DeVette from the NDP, Tim Lewis from the Liberal Party, Colton Waller from the People's Party, Harold Albrecht from the Conservative Party, and Stephanie Gertz from the Green Party. Tim Lewis will answer the first question, and the previous rotation will continue. Concluding remarks will be in reverse order. We'll start the debate with Riani DeVette for opening remarks.
Thank you, James. Is the sound clear? Thank you. So my name is Riani DeVette, and I'm the NDP candidate for Kitchener-Conestoga. I want to thank you all for coming out here today. It's lovely to have full audiences and to be able to share some of our vision and ideas. But in order to talk about our vision and ideas, it's also important to recognize what we see in our communities. And the number one thing that I encounter when I knock on doors and when I talk to people is the question of affordability. People are struggling to make ends meet. Families are every month making really hard choices between things that they need and things that they need even more. So these are the things that we need to try and fix. The issue that we see is that we have a country that has immense wealth and immense opportunity. But what we see is that a small portion of the population is making headway. They are increasing their wealth and their prosperity in leaps and bounds, while the majority of people are struggling from month to month. More than half of Canadian households say that they struggle to make ends meet every month. A majority of Canadians are within $200 of not being able to pay their bills. People are paying necessities with their credit cards, something which most of us were taught from childhood is not a good thing to do. So for the NDP, it is important to put people first and to find the ways in which we can make people prosper, because when people prosper, our entire community will prosper. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Lewis from the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for taking time. Hold on. We're good. Thank you guys for taking time out of your schedule. I want to make sure you're all awake. This is good for our community, and it is good for democracy. My name is Tim Lewis. I live in Forest Heights area of Kitchener. where my wife, Brenda, and I are raising our 2 children. I'm a professional musician. I work hard to support my family, and I do know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. If you recognize me, for those of you I have met or have not met, I was the Liberal candidate here in 2015, and I fell short by 251 votes. So that was one of the closest races in the country, and we already know it's going to be close again this time. So I love our small communities here in Kitchener-Conestoga. We've got this wonderful rural-urban split. Every year I'm out marching in parades, flipping pancakes in Elmira and in Wellesley, participating in the Wilmot Terry Fox events, and volunteering in many other community events. For the last 4 years I've stayed active. I've been out listening to you, knocked on your doors and listened to your ideas. I'm working hard to earn the right to be your member of parliament here in Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you. Colton Waller from the People's Party.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Colton Waller. I'm the People's Party candidate here in Kitchener-Conestoga. I'm a political science and economics student at Wilfrid Laurier University, and I'm in my 3rd year now. The People's Party of Canada believes in the free market, and we know that the Waterloo region and Kitchener-Waterloo has a long and storied history of business innovation and entrepreneurship. This is where Kaufman Rubber was founded, which produced the finest boots in the British Empire. This is where Electrohome was founded, which produced the first phonographs in the country. And in recent decades, we've also seen some of the greatest success stories in tech happen here. BlackBerry, which arguably created the very concept of the smartphone, and more recent businesses such as OpenText and Thalmic Labs, now known as North. The People's Party of Canada believes in the supremacy of the free market and its ability to intuitively understand the needs, wants, and desires of its consumers. To that end, we would like to deregulate business and make it easier for entrepreneurs to get their ideas off the ground. And we would also like to lower the income tax for all Canadians, 15% for all income between $15,000 and $100,000. These are the proper steps forward, and they have worked for us before, and it's time to bring back this common sense. Thank you.
Thank you. From the Conservative Party, Harold Albrecht.
Good afternoon. I'm Harold Albrecht, your Conservative candidate for Kitchener-Conestoga. I have the privilege of serving as your Member of Parliament. I've had the privilege of serving as your Member of Parliament for the past 13 years. I've lived in the riding of Kitchener-Conestoga all my life. I live in Kitchener with my wife, Darlene. We have 3 adult children and 9 grandchildren. Our Conservative team, under the leadership of Andrew Scheer, has introduced several measures to help you get ahead. The Universal Tax Credit will give the average Canadian family over $800 more to spend on home renovations, a trip, or to put into savings. Kitchener-Conestoga residents are eager to see the removal of GST from home heating costs. In Canada, heating your home is not a luxury, it's a necessity. When it's 30 below, you shouldn't have to decide between putting food on your table or heating your home. That's why we will remove the tax on those bills, leaving you more money at the end of each month. Over the past 13 years, we have met at fall fairs, fish fries, Hungry Men's breakfasts, in my office, and at your doors. My priorities have been clear: listening to you, providing assistance through my office, and representing your voices in Ottawa. Canada should be a country where no ambition is too big and where no dream is too small. We should be a principled force for peace and freedom on the world stage, a disciplined protector of tax dollars here at home, a welcoming land of refuge for the world's persecuted and afflicted, and a proud champion for clean Canadian technology. It's been my honor to serve as your Member of Parliament, and I'm asking once again for your support for experienced leadership here in Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, my name is Stephanie Gertz. I just want to say that I currently live in Petersburg with my husband and 2 small children that are 4 and 6 years old. I'm a small business owner. My father, Alan Beach, is a small business owner. He's currently transitioning his company, a roofing company, over to his son, my brother, David Beach. My husband is a small business owner. He owns his own tech company that works within hospitals to do analytics of hospital data. And I have to say, my 6-year-old is an entrepreneur. Just recently, he started his own iced tea stand in front of the house and is looking for additional ways to making revenue so that he could actually give the money away. I keep telling him that that's not the proper thing to do. He should save it. But he's like his mom and wants to help other people. I'm a former Toronto police officer. For 7 years, I was a Toronto police officer after I graduated from the University of Waterloo. And then when we moved back to Petersburg to have a family, I decided to be a stay-at-home mom and bake bread and do garden. So I did a 20-foot by 30-foot garden. I learned how to do square-foot gardening and bake bread in the oven and all that stuff, and then decided that I couldn't stay home. I had to have an impact in my community. So I started my own small business doing event planning, bringing local resources to local families that somehow turned into running co-working spaces, that somehow turned into running innovation spaces, working with tech, manufacturing, and health and wellness companies, bringing them together to find common problems and find common solutions. I'm also working with a living well company called Livescape, and helping my brother-in-law, who's a gastroenterologist in the United States. I have a lot of experience with small businesses, and I'm very happy tonight to be sitting in front of you guys to be talking about small businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the question and answer portion of the afternoon, and I'd like to remind the candidates to please keep your answers to 60 seconds. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the largest business organization in Canada, has asked for a royal commission to study the national taxation system to implement fairness and simplicity for all classes of taxpayers. There's been no comprehensive review of the tax system in 50 years, and the system is a patchwork that does not serve individuals or businesses in the 21st century. Would you support this royal commission, and if not, what would you propose to fix the tax system? And to begin discussion, Tim Lewis from the Liberal Party.
Sure. Wait till this is on. I'm not going to tap it this time. Yes, we would support that. One of the first things that we did when we formed government was cut taxes for 9 million Canadians, middle-class Canadians, and we raised taxes on the wealthiest 1%. When we got elected in 2015, we decided to focus on the middle class, and that is working. It's growing the economy. We've got 40-year historic lows in unemployment and over 1 million new jobs created, most of which are full-time, and basically our plan is working. We're investing in infrastructure, and we've also cut small business taxes. I've mentioned how small businesses drive our economy here, from 11 to 9%. So I'm excited about that. We would support that and support mostly small businesses and middle-class families.
Thank you. Mr. Waller from the People's Party.
Yes, the People's Party would support the Royal Commission to review the taxes. But I'm also going to take this time to tell you about some of the taxes that the People's Party wants to do, because this is one of the policies that I am most proud about. As I already mentioned, we would like to cut the income tax to 15% for all income between $15,000 to $100,000 a year. We would also seek to raise the tax exemption from the current $11,000 to $15,000. Income that is over $100,000 would be taxed at 25%. We want to lower the corporate tax from 15% to 10%. We want to scrap the carbon tax and abolish the capital gains tax. We would also seek to extend the accelerated capital cost allowance to all industries in the economy so that all businesses may write off equipment and machinery that they need faster than they would normally be able to.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht, would your party support the Royal Commission?
I'm not going to speak on behalf of my party, but personally I would definitely support a review of our tax system. The current system, with many of the extra taxes that have been added, including the current carbon tax, are crippling our economy. Many of our residents are paying the tax through their gasoline, through their home heating costs, while many of the major emitters are being let off the hook. So that's one area that has to be changed. The other area is the increased taxes on small businesses. While it's true that the Liberal government did reduce the small business taxation, it was after pressure from the small business community at a time when they had proposed to actually increase the taxes on small businesses. So it's important to recognize that the small business community in Kitchener-Waterloo and the Kitchener-Conestoga riding are some of the major providers of job creation in our community. And so anything we can do to improve that is certainly something I would support.
Thank you. Ms. Kurtz?
Yes, absolutely. We would agree to the Royal Commission to study the tax system. The Green Party actually wants to create an arm's-length federal tax commission to analyze the tax system for fairness, so we're right in line with each other. Obviously, the growing gap of the rich and poor indicates there is something wrong, and we believe that Canadians should be able to challenge the tax system, so yes.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette?
Thank you. Yes. New Democrats believe that Canadians need to be able to trust their federal government and its agencies and crown corporations to act in a fair and ethical way. And one of those things would be how we deal with taxes. The majority of Canadians right now, more than 50% of people in this country, feel that the taxation system is not fair and that regular people are being unfairly burdened, whereas the super rich, and we're talking about people with wealth of $20 million and more, and corporations get away with a lot, and they are not paying their fair share of taxes. So we would support a complete revisiting of our taxation system and looking at how we can make it more fair and how we can fight corruption. Currently, $20 to $30 billion per year is written off in corporate taxes for corporations who can't pay their taxes, something that the average citizen would not be able to get away with. We have $240 billion in foreign tax accounts that have been squirreled out of the country. We have $429 billion in foreign accounts that have been legally taken out of that country and out of this country, and that leads to a loss to tax revenue of approximately $20 billion a year. So we are losing a lot of money to corporations who have the money to pay lawyers and accountants to find ways to hide their money. We also have institutions like the Export Development of Canada who lent $41 billion to the Gupta family, who was a family that was being accused of unbelievable corruption in South Africa. It's a very, very wealthy family, and yet somehow the EDC thought it fit to lend them $41 million, which they then used to buy a jet to flee out of South Africa to evade the police.
Thank you. It's open for debate if anyone wanted to debate it. We're good? How will your party address fiscal responsibilities, most notably debt and deficits, against spending commitments? To begin the answer on this portion, Mr. Waller.
So the People's Party has made it very clear that we would balance the budget within 2 years. This is something that Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservative Party, originally pledged to do, and he's since said that they would now balance the budget in 5 years, which conveniently would require them to win another election after this one. We can balance the budget by eliminating spending where it doesn't need to be. For example, corporate subsidies and welfare. We're giving out billions of dollars a year to corporations that don't need it. We want a level playing field. That's what a free market is. So nobody's going to be getting any handouts because that's picking winners and losers, and that's against the philosophy of free enterprise. The other thing that we would seek to do is to limit the amount of foreign aid that we send out of this country. Yes, it does serve some good purposes, but there's no reason why Canadian taxpayer dollars should be spent fighting climate change in Asia and building roads in Africa. It simply doesn't work out logically. So when you eliminate that kind of spending, you can find those billions of dollars that allows us to reduce the debt and balance the budget. And once we have a surplus, then we can begin paying down not only the debt, but the interest that we are paying on that debt. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht?
Just to follow up on the interest that we're currently paying on our national debt, we're paying over $25 billion per year just on interest on the debt that we have. I remember clearly in the last campaign in 2015, the Prime Minister of our country looked into the camera, looked into the eyes of Canadians and said, "I will promise you that by 2019, the budget will be balanced." Well, here we are with a $20 billion deficit for 1 year alone. He's added over $70 billion of debt during a time of economic prosperity. We have to get our fiscal house in order. We cannot keep spending money we don't have. We can't keep giving $12 million to Loblaws to buy fridges. We can't keep investing in the Asia Infrastructure Bank and all of the work that they're doing overseas when we should be spending that money at home here. So those are the kinds of things that we can cut, and we can bring our budget back to balance in a responsible time. To do it in 2 years would be irresponsible. Many of you here know that the cuts that currently are happening are affecting your personal lives and your kids' lives, and so we want to do it in a responsible way that gets our spending under control, but also doesn't leave massive pain on our current economy.
Thank you. Ms. Gertz?
So the Green Party was the first political party to submit their platform to the parliamentary office. It was then first reviewed and sent back. So out of all the other parties, we were the first one to do that because we understand having a balanced platform is what needs to happen. But we're not doing a balanced platform at the expense of cutting services and cutting resources to our communities, to our schools, to our educational centers, to our small businesses or any businesses. What we would be doing is closing tax loopholes that benefit the wealthy, ending offshore tax dodging, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, increasing federal corporate tax from the 15% to the 21% tax to match USA, which would then decrease the amount of dead money sitting around. And then we would also do 5% surcharge on commercial bank profit, which would be $43.15 billion in 2018. This does not include taxing, though. We would not tax the credit unions or co-ops.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette?
Thank you. I want to start off by saying that we have a little spending problem. What we also have is a huge income problem. So in terms of the spending problem, yes, we do spend too much money on corporate subsidies, and that has to stop. But we also have a huge income problem, and I've already mentioned the billions that we lose every year due to a lack of collection, due to lax laws, due to loopholes, things that really need to be strengthened to make sure that those who have the means and who benefit disproportionately from the wealth and the infrastructure of this country pay their fair share. We are not meeting our targets of international spending. And I know that it's a nice, easy ball to hit that one, but let's be clear that we spend money on foreign aid, partly because it makes us feel good about ourselves, and partly because that is who we are as Canadians, and partly because we are altruistic, but that is only a small part of the picture. We spend money on foreign countries on specific projects for specific purposes. We spend money so that Canadians can travel abroad and be safe because we have good relationships with countries, because we are helping people in those countries. We spend money to build roads in Africa so that business people can import and export their goods with ease. So that is not just give away money for nothing. When we help Asian countries to develop clean technology, it is because, as some of my fellow candidates like to mention, greenhouse gases don't need a passport. So the onus is not just on keeping our own air clean, but if we help other countries keep their air clean, it benefits us as well. So the notion that it's just a giveaway and we don't get anything for it is simply a fallacy.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Well, we know that Canada can't cut its way to prosperity. Cuts don't help people, cuts don't grow the economy, austerity does not help. And putting the interests of wealthy people in front of the middle class is something that's not going to help our community. We can't afford another level of federal conservative cuts on top of the provincial conservative cuts that we're already facing. So we know that we need to invest in people, we need to invest in our community, and we need to make sure that's done with good economic sense. In 2015, the Liberal government made a plan to invest in the middle class, and that plan is working with record low unemployment and with over 1 million new jobs created. That plan is working. We're also, like I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again because so many of us are small business owners, including myself. Lowering that small business tax from 11% to 9% is good. What we can do is, mentioned here before, is a newly elected Liberal government will ensure that international tech giants are paying the corporate revenues that are generated in Canada, those big companies that are getting away with it. Also, we need to crack down on corporate tax evasion. So there's a lot of work being done, it's working, but there's still plenty of work to do.
Thank you. So, yeah, Ms. Gertz, go ahead.
So when I'm reviewing online the different platforms, I like to read the Conservatives, Liberals, and NDPs, and I actually saw something mentioned by the Scheer government talking about a pledge of reducing $1.5 billion in cuts to corporate welfare. I thought, yes, this is perfect. This is exactly something I can agree upon. Only then do I find out that they're actually targeting the innovation clusters that are being developed across Canada, one of which would be an innovation cluster called Next Generation Manufacturing Supercluster in Ontario. So when we talk about cuts and we talk about taking money away, without actually understanding and realizing the impact of that manufacturing supercluster, creating $13.5 billion over 10 years and 13,500 jobs. So I'm not too sure if the Conservative would like to mention that.
Mr. Albrecht, would you like to respond?
Just to say about the superclusters, it's fine to create lots of jobs, and creating jobs by government is fairly easy to do. I'm more committed to having the private sector, the small business community create jobs that are productive in our community and are long-term sustainable jobs.
Ms. Gertz, respond.
Yes, sorry. So my personal experience with superclusters, with innovation spaces, superclusters are bringing together businesses, municipalities, educational institutions, small and big businesses all come together. Plus, there is private money has to match dollar for dollar. So it is creating the small businesses. It is creating the jobs. And if we're talking about increasing manufacturing in Ontario, I think it's a huge. I was absolutely shocked. I had to stay up to 2 o'clock in the morning because I could not fall asleep because of how devastated I was with the whole idea of how many people are working together already that have been spending a year or two trying to create these superclusters only for this funding to be cut if the sheer government gets in power.
Ms. DeVette?
Can I also just say that, you know, I hear, and it's really encouraging to hear from both our Liberal and Conservative candidates, how they are committed to cutting corporate welfare and closing loopholes. The reality is that these are the two parties who have been governing this country all along. So they have had multiple opportunities to stop corporate welfare, and yet government after government, Conservative or Liberal, we keep seeing this. We keep seeing money being given away to corporations. So I would really like to believe that this is the time it's going to be different, but I don't know what to base that trust on.
And Mr. Waller, to end this conversation.
Is it working? Okay. I would just like to address Mr. Albrecht. I would just like to address Mr. Albrecht's point about the budget. Like Mrs. DeVette said, it has been the Liberals and Conservatives that have been governing this country all along, and the reason why we're in the mess today is because they have successfully kicked the can down the road. So you had Pierre Elliott Trudeau, dumped a bunch of debt on us that we're still paying for today. Then we have Brian Mulroney, a Conservative. Then we had Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, who did their best to lower that debt. And then you had Stephen Harper, who also lumped a bunch of debt on top of us. So I'm wondering why we should believe the Conservatives now when they say they will balance the budget in 5 years, because I personally believe that if a politician makes a promise that's longer than 4 years, you might as well just consider it a lie right away.
Mr. Albrecht, I'll give the last word to you.
A comment on the promise to balance the budget. During the economic downturn, the international economic downturn, 2008 and following, our government did borrow money. We did go into debt, and we went into debt with our eyes wide open, recognizing that we had to bring the budget back to balance by the end of that term. We promised to bring the budget back to balance by the end of our term, and we left the budget with a $1.5 billion surplus. So to say that we haven't kept our promise on balancing the budget is not true.
Thank you. That was the final word. Yeah, sorry, you got to move on. Soy Canada, a national organization representing farmers and processors in the soybean industry, has asked for federal government financial assistance in response to being shut out of the Chinese market. Would you support this request for support? Mr. Albrecht, we'll begin with you.
My biggest concern with the current crisis, I would say, with our international market, specifically China, is the fact that the current government neglected to appoint an ambassador for 8 months during a time when there was a lot of issues on the table that should have been addressed. And so rather than addressing the issues with an ambassador, we kicked the can down the road, and now we have this crisis not only in soybeans but also in pork and beef imports to China, exports from Canada to China. And so I really support the idea of having a better trade relationship. The farmers do not want to farm the mailbox. They would far rather have an equal, level playing field where they can get ahead and manage their own affairs well. So while we need to support our farmers if they're in desperate need, we always want to try to keep that as a very last resort. And I would point to the supply managed sector, which my colleague to my left here would say that he wants to get rid of. The supply managed sector in agriculture has been the cause of economic prosperity, not just for our farmers, but for our entire rural economy. You talk about Myra, St. Jacobs, Wellesley, all of these areas are benefiting from the supply managed sector, which has given our farmers the ability to make a decent living, provide high quality, nutritious food, and that's the model I would like to see happen.
Thank you.
Should I still talk? Okay, thank you. Absolutely, opening up dialogue, communicating, talking, finding new solutions. I think also we need to recognize that this is not the only time that farmers are struggling. Farmers are struggling all the time. A lot of farmers, which I've met with and talked with, talk about having to work at least one more job on top of what their farming is because they have to bring additional revenue in. So I would say that yes, open up dialogue, but also look at innovation opportunities for these farmers. Some of these farmers would transition over to different seeds, different food, different ideas, if there was a revenue or a funding opportunity available to them in the year that they try it. So, for example, Greens would like to renew the National Environmental Farm Plan program to help farmers protect wildlife areas, marginal lands, water quality, and streams. We also want to do Green Infrastructure Fund to restore natural buffers. So by offering opportunities for them to increase their revenue or have revenue options alternative to their farming practices, it'll allow them to sit back and express or explore different options of farming that may be moving towards closer in the future of what we need to be farming.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette?
Thank you. Yes, I think as a last option, it is definitely something that should be on the table. But I think we also need to acknowledge that the situation is unfortunate and could maybe have been managed a lot better and differently from the beginning. I am a firm believer in the rule of law. I believe strongly that everybody needs to be accountable to the law and that we are all equal before the law. And so in principle, when we arrest somebody because there's an extradition order on that person, that might seem fair. But when at the same time we are letting SNC-Lavalin go on charges because it's convenient, where is the equality and the justice in that? So on the one hand, yes, we don't want workers to lose their jobs, but on the other hand, we're having farmers losing their income, and that seems to be fair game. So I would like to see government act a lot stronger, deal better with China and try to solve the problem. But yes, if it can't be solved in the nearby future, we will need to look at options to help those farmers out.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Well, our region's farmers and food processors are the backbone of our region. And again, with this rural-urban split in Kitchener-Conestoga, we acknowledge the hard work that they do. We want to make sure that we're strengthening and supporting farmers so they can both compete locally and compete on a world stage. Mostly, sometimes a farmer needs financial support. You can't take a season off. This is a lifetime commitment. And the two things that happen sometimes are, if right now we're in between a trade war, we have to make sure that our government is standing up for our agricultural workers. And the other one is in extreme weather events. Right now we have these extreme weather events that are affecting things. The crops almost didn't get in time. So we focus on programs, on risk management programs like agri-stability. And I'm proud to say that the government has stood up for farmers here in defending supply management. That's something we did. And we also have negotiated 3 major treaties free trade treaties, NAFTA, CP, TPP, and the European Union. So we want to make sure that these businesses can scale up and compete on the global market, and we want to make sure that they're protected, and also we have a safe supply of food here at home.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
On the subject of China, it is a very complex situation because it has many dimensions to it, including that of national security. While a free trade agreement with them would be most beneficial, that is not viable right now. However, the People's Party would work to solve the diplomatic crisis with China and open that market up again, because after the United States, the European Union, China is the world's largest market, and they have a great demand for our agricultural products that we produce here. But we also want to make it cheaper for farmers to run their businesses, because they are businesses, and for that reason, we're going to drop the corporate tax from 15% to 10%. On the subject of supply management, it is a cartel. Plain and simple. When it was originally created, it had a good purpose, and we readily admit that. It ensured that milk was properly produced as homogenization was first rolled in. However, now it has restricted competition in the dairy and poultry markets so that nearly everything that you find in the store is more expensive. I do not know why we have to spend so much more for a dozen eggs when you can hop across the border and you can get it for 85 cents. And you're paying, what, $3 to $4 depending on where you go here in the Waterloo region. It depends what store you go to. There's simply no reason for that. The People's Party would phase out supply management, but we would do it gradually. We wouldn't just rip the rug out from under people. We would buy back the quotas that have already been bought and ensure that there is a smooth transition over to a free market in the dairy and poultry industries.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht, and then we'll go with Ms. Devet.
Just a comment on the fact that you can buy certain products in the U.S. cheaper than you can buy them in Canada. Of course you can, because the U.S. government subsidizes its farming industry in an unbelievable manner. So the principle of supply management is a very conservative idea. In Canada, if you want to buy milk, if you pay 20 cents an extra for it, you decide to buy milk. In the U.S., you pay for milk whether you're buying it or not, because you're paying it through your taxes. I would far rather have our farmers directing their own affairs through a supply managed system, which is operated by the farmers, than to have a government come along and subsidize those farms at taxpayers' expense when those taxpayers may not even want to purchase that commodity. It's a conservative idea to have a supply managed system in Canada.
Yeah, I just want to say as well that from the side of the NDP, we are strongly supportive of a supply management system. Growing up in South Africa, I have seen the devastating effects on farmers when you don't have that system in place, and when foreign agricultural corporations are allowed to bring their heavily government subsidized products and produce and meat into the country and dump it on the market at a fraction of the cost that local farmers can produce it. So dropping supply management is harmful to farmers. And if you think it isn't, go ask the farmers in the US how much they benefit from not having a supply management system. They live on a razor's edge. Many of them are not making ends meet. They are closing down, especially dairy farms. They can't make ends meet because they can't get the money they need for their products, even with the government subsidies.
Mr. Lewis, and then we'll come to you, Mr. Waller, to wrap it up.
Sure, we're going to get a lot of agreement on this table, which is sometimes a good thing in politics, I would think. I agree and support, our government supports supply management. It might be a small C conservative idea, but it was a liberal government that brought it in, but that's beyond the point. It's a good idea. And you know what, when we're driving in through these farms and we see that blue and white sign, we know there's a local farmers. We know that our food is safe. We know that our food is local, and we know it's good for the economy, our local economy. We also know it's good for the environment because we're not bringing in milk from somewhere else. We don't know what's in there, and we're getting local stuff right here, close to home.
Mr. Waller, we'll finish with you.
I'd just like to bring some more numbers into the discussion here on supply management. It is a detriment to the economy as a whole because Canadians are paying roughly $400 more per year for their dairy and poultry products. and that impacts the poorest 20% of Canadians the worst. It amounts to, roughly, a 2.5% tax on your income. I think that's unacceptable.
Thank you. Please explain your party's position on Pharmacare Reform and what are the expected costs to the taxpayers. Ms. Gertz, we'll begin with you.
So the Green government, along with some other parties, believe that the Pharmacare is life-saving and cost-cutting. So the Green Party has put out their platform. It was the first one to be costed. So in our platform, we did say that it would be $26.7 billion in the first year. At 2024 and 2025, it would cost $31.3 billion, with $17 billion paid by the provinces. Pharmacare is a tough subject because there's a big number to it. But we need to realize that each province already gives money out to people. So the idea is that by working with each province independently, you'd be looking at reducing or totally cutting those costs that is already being paid out to people. Pharmacare in itself, and I'm sure Riani will speak very greatly on it, but Pharmacare itself is such an urgent need in our community. It will reduce overall costs for health and wellness across the country.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette on Pharmacare.
Thank you. I thought I actually had the full figures in front of me, and now I'm just going to have to work from memory, but that's fine. So the NDP wants to expand Pharmacare to everybody as a universal program. It is going to cost, and this is the bit where I'm now speaking of memory, and so please forgive me if I have this wrong. I think we costed it at $12 billion for the first year, and over 4 years we're looking at $20 billion for the total cost. The reason that the cost estimate for the first year is considerably higher is because there are a lot of people that have been neglecting health conditions because they couldn't afford their medicine. And so a lot of people will take advantage of that in the first year, but that might not necessarily be chronic conditions that will carry over into the second and the third year. So after about a year, it will stabilize. In terms of paying for that, that is one of the big recipients of the tax on the 1% of people who earn more than $20 million a year will pay for that, and that has been costed. So that is an additional cost to the taxpayer, but it will not be us, the taxpayer, it will be those super wealthy people, and it will be an additional income as well. However, in terms of benefits, it is estimated that the average Canadian will save approximately $500 per year, because most of us, even if we do have Pharmacare as part of our healthcare plans through our employers, we still have to do co-payments. It will also bring about a saving of approximately $600 per employee per year to business owners who are currently paying for healthcare for their employees. So there's a huge saving to the Canadian business owner directly, but there's also an indirect benefit, because when people can actually not just be diagnosed, but be treated, they become more productive workers. They will have to take less sick days. They will spend less time in hospitals. So in terms of productivity in the labor place, that will also see an uptick once we have Pharmacare in place.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Well, Canadians are extremely proud of our universal health care, and it's something we should be proud about. It can always need to be improved, and we're working hard to improve that, of course. But we are one of the only countries that has a universal healthcare system that does not have a universal pharmacare system. My mother-in-law has heart disease, and we went to the hospital, fantastic care, and everything was paid for. I mean, the MRIs, the x-rays, everything she did was paid for. I think you basically pay for parking at the hospital. That's about it. She's living with us, and we're taking care of her, and I see the cost of her heart medication, the cost of these pills. They're exorbitant, and no one should have to make that decision of deciding can they keep their home because they can't afford the medicines, or can they take the medicine because they can't afford it. That's going to make a population even sicker. So we're taking concrete steps. We support national pharmacare, and we're going to work with the provinces, and we're going to work hard to make sure that happens. That's part of our re-elected strategy. Also, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are people with rare diseases. We want to make sure that we're funding and bring medication costs down for rare diseases, because that is something that is not talked about enough. But for the people that it affects, it is life-changing.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
So the People's Party's stance on pharmacare is simple, but it's also principled. So a lot of the countries in the world that have that universal pharmacare system are what you would call unitary states. And you'll have to forgive me for the political theory here. Canada is not a unitary state. We are a confederation, which means that provinces should have the most autonomy in the confederation. Provinces are responsible for healthcare, and they're responsible for education, among other responsibilities as well. So the federal government, if the PPC were to form a federal government, we would not intervene in provincial jurisdiction, flat out. It would be up to the provinces to develop that themselves. The only way that the federal government intervenes into the provincial healthcare jurisdiction right now is to divvy out the Canada Health and Social transfers. But really in this situation, the federal government is just acting as a middleman, because it comes from your HST, the federal government takes it, and then they divvy it out to the provinces. So what the People's Party wants to do is we're just going to take GST out completely, and we will leave it up to the provinces to fill in that room themselves. So the HST, we would remove the GST portion of that, and then the Ontario government would then fill it in themselves. That means that they have the money right there, and it's going directly into their coffers, and because it's a continuous transfer, because people are always making transactions, they will be able to better allocate those resources in the way that they see fit, rather than us just dumping a lump sum on them at the beginning of the year, and then they spend it on things other than healthcare.
Thank you. We'll last with Mr. Albrecht, and then we'll come to you, Ms. Gay.
I find it interesting that the Liberal Party is proposing a national pharmacare system when I believe it was 1997 when they first proposed it in their Red Book promises in their platform. So here we are 22 years later, and still they don't have it. I think that the current system in Canada, where over 90% of people have some sort of pharmacare coverage through their employer, I think is working well. It is true that roughly 10% do not have that coverage, and I would support any study that would help to close that gap. But to have a completely national pharmacare system, disrupt the current supply that is being cared for very well by private insurers, I think would not be the wise way to go.
Mr. Lewis, we'll come to you, and then after Ms. Gertz, we'll start with you with the response.
Yes, I was just going to ask a question to the Liberal candidate, Tim Lewis. Numbers. We mentioned numbers. What would be the Liberal government's numbers for pharmacare?
I don't have those on me right now, and so I'd have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Ms. Vet?
Yes, thank you. I'm Pharmacare. I'm from the NDP, pardon me, this is close to the heart. Maybe what is needed is time to relook the Canadian Healthcare Act, because Canadians are being done a disservice. We are currently relying a lot on employers to provide healthcare for employees, especially for things like pharmacare. First of all, it is putting an onus on employers. Secondly, it isn't universal. And thirdly, even the employees that do have that coverage, it is precarious because they know they might tomorrow lose their job and be without it. Or they might retire and then suddenly they have to shift to a different system. Even if they have it, they still have to make co-payments on it. And when you're dependent on a private insurer, private businesses are not in the business of healthcare because they really, really care about people. They are in the business because they really, really care about profits. So it's time to take the profit out of our healthcare. My health is not for sale. And if we have a national pharmacare plan, government can negotiate prices with drug companies who have been increasing their prices year after year in astronomical amounts that bears no relevance to what is happening in the marketplace. They have gone crazy, they are out of control, and they just push prices up by 100, 200, 300% on a drug overnight with no reason, just because they can. It is time that we put a stop to it. And I know I'm almost out of time, but I want to raise this issue, and this comes to the Canadian Health Act. We hear the Liberals paying lip service to it. And I've spoken to Liberal MPs in this region, and they all love it and they're supporting it, but they won't act on it. And so today we find that the only freestanding clinic in New Brunswick that provides abortion services have now been declared not able to do it anymore. From now on in New Brunswick, if you want to have an abortion, you can only have it at a government hospital. And that was done by a Conservative Premier, and it happens because a Liberal government cannot be bothered to make sure that the provisions of the Canada Health Act is strictly enforced at a provincial level.
Thank you. Climate change is a concern for the business community, just as it is for all Canadians. Many municipalities are passing a resolution saying there's a climate crisis. Please make your case for your party's policy approach to the environment. Ms. DeVette?
Thank you. So yes, we are very, very strongly involved in looking at the environment and at the emission of greenhouse gases. I think we've got a very good policy for it, but what makes our policy, for me, fundamentally a principled one, is that we do it while looking at workers. We are cognizant of the fact that we are looking at an economy and a world that's in transition. And it's not a small transition, it is almost a revolution of technology. And whenever in history we've had these revolutions of technology, it creates economic and employment upset. We are in a fortunate position that we have been able to predict this transition, this revolution, and that instead of an overnight change, we are looking at a phasing in and phasing out approach. And that can really soften the blow for many people. So I want to make it clear that when we talk about things like not providing subsidies for fossil fuels, it does not mean we're going to close fossil fuel industries tomorrow. It simply means that we're not going to pay for them. If oil companies want pipelines, they make billions of dollars in profits. Please let them pay for their own pipelines. If they want to build a refinery, please let them pay for it out of their own profits and not out of our taxpayers' pockets. But we also acknowledge that green technology and clean energy is the leading growing industry in the world. This is where investors in the private sector are putting in their money at double the rate that they're putting it in fossil fuel industry. This is where jobs are being created. And if we as Canada want to take a leading role, we have to step up our game there. And so some of the things that we can do is to start retrofitting our homes and our buildings, to utilize all the expertise and the knowledge and the genius that is located in our country and in our own region of people who've got wonderful ideas of how to advance clean technology. Let's put some taxpayers' money into the development of those and make sure that those things become the new industries of Canada that can be exported to the world and that can make us a great employment creator, but also a great export country. We are looking at the moving over to zero emissions vehicles. And one of the things would be to look at making, transitioning to 2030 to have no more fossil fuel gas-powered vehicles produced in Canada, but that all vehicles being manufactured in Canada should run on clean energy. So those are just some of the things we'll be looking at.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, on climate change?
Yes, we had an entire debate about this last night. Four of us were here. The Conservative member couldn't make it. But we had an entire discussion, which is wonderful to hear, that in this community that we acknowledge it. Woolwich has actually acknowledged that we have a climate crisis here. When I'm knocking on doors and I talk to people, there are young families, and we shouldn't be hearing this, there are young families that are saying, I don't know if I want to start a family and bring a child into this world because I'm scared of the climate change. And when we talk to seniors, they say, I want to do more to protect the planet for my children, for my grandchildren. So we have steps to take. We have to protect ourselves from the flooding and the natural disasters that we see so close to home here in Woolwich, here in Hamburg. We have to plan for tomorrow and make that transition to green energy. The ultimate goal is net zero emissions by 2050. The midterm goals we have of getting there every 5 years, setting targets so we can do that. And some of the solutions are high-tech and some of the solutions are very low-tech. A low-tech solution is simply we're going to decide to plant 2 billion trees. 2 billion trees. And as far as retrofitting, you were right. We have a plan to retrofit homes. Interest-free loan, if we're elected, interest-free loan of up to $40,000 that you can take and use that to retrofit your home for energy efficiency, whether it's insulation, solar panels, or it could be flood protection. That's money that you can have right away that you can use to protect our own homes and our own businesses. We're going to give a $1,000 rebate to electric vehicles to make sure that we make that transition to clean energy. We've just moved to ban single-use plastics, and we're also going to phase coal out nationwide. Right now, there are no more smog days here in Ontario. Remember smog days when we were younger? That's a thing in the past. We're working, but we have to work at the same time to make that transition to the clean energy, protect those jobs, and keep growing the economy, but protect our planet as well.
Thank you. Mr. Waller, climate change?
I was very fortunate last week to meet with the mayor of Kitchener, and he brought a lot of these topics and wanted me to specifically address them, and he also had some questions from the from the townships as well. And speaking specifically to climate change, I was able to commit to Mr. Barry Verbanovic that the People's Party, if we were to form a government, that we would directly fund that infrastructure that's needed to prevent those kinds of extreme weather events here in the Waterloo region, such as the flooding that happens in the New Hamburg area. One thing, however, that I would like to tell everyone, and this is something that I've repeated often because I find it very interesting but also very surprising. Last year, the United States of America led the world in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And they did that without a carbon tax. And they did that without government intervention. And they did that without signing on to the Paris Accord. And the way that they were able to do that is because they let the free market develop the technological solutions that power the reducing of emissions. We can do the same thing here in Canada. I believe that the result to limiting our emissions, mitigating climate change, and perhaps reversing it lies with the free market, because they have continuously proven that they can come up with the solutions very quickly, on time and on budget, and way better than the government can do it.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht, on climate change?
Right. When it comes to climate change and specifically the protection of our environment, I think all of us should be very concerned. And I think what we need to do is examine our own personal practices. I think it's important that we participate in many of the recycling, composting activities that are available to us. And I've done that for many, many years. Also, in terms of planting trees, I've planted over 1,700 trees on my property, and I know that that is contributing to sequestering carbon. When it comes to the environment as it relates to water pollution, I'm very concerned that we are doing virtually nothing to preserve our sources of clean water. The current government in November of 2015 allowed the government of Montreal to dump 8 billion liters of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence River. That is not protecting our environment. When it comes to protecting our environment, we need to work alongside and along with some of the environmental groups that have been doing excellent work on this for many years. Ducks Unlimited is one example. Just in my area of Wilmot Township, recently a private developer committed $1.5 million to restoring a wetland area right along the Nith River. This will be a huge impact in terms of reducing flooding and sequestering carbon, improving our water quality. And it's these kind of initiatives that we need to get together with groups that are already doing. Our farmers, our anglers, and hunters are some of our foremost environmentalists, working along with farmers to have them plant green cover crops, having them do no-till farming, reducing the number of passes over a field. All of these initiatives can work hand in hand if we will get behind and work alongside some of the individual groups that are already doing good work.
Ms. Gertz, we'll end with you, and then Ms. DeWitt will have you respond to Mr. Albrecht.
So I'd like to rebut what he said, but I'm going to say my thing first, and then we'll do Riani.
Sure,
and then me.
yep.
So the Green Party doesn't view the environment as a one single topic. It's not trees, it's not water. It's everything that we need to look at around us. It's our infrastructure, it's our roadways, it's our housing, it's our transportation models. So the Greens would like to protect our waterway through a water national strategy, protect our food through an environmental farm plan, and protect our infrastructure through a green infrastructure fund, increase affordability of life and property by launching an extensive energy retrofit, which will create 4 million jobs. We want to change building codes to create net zero housing, which will then only cost it only costs you change pockets, money in your pockets to pay for your utility costs. We want to create an energy grid across Canada so that we're not giving excess energy to the United States and when it should be used in other areas. We're looking at a just transition. So it's transitioning the coal, oil, and gas workers, not just simply pulling the wool out or pulling the rug out underneath their feet, but understanding that these workers are part of our community and we need to support them. So the Green Party fully plans to do a just transition, which means encouraging them, training them, moving them into new roles in the clean energy sector. In the clean energy sector, there's 268,000 jobs in the clean energy sector and 436,000 in the energy efficiency sector. Currently, there's 62,000 in the oil, gas sectors in 2018. Where are jobs really being created? Are we really fighting for the 62,000 jobs that the Green Party believes and will transition them into the clean energy sector? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette, you wanted to respond to Mr. Albrecht?
Yes, it's really encouraging to hear the Conservative Party speak so eloquently about their plans to protect the environment. Maybe the next time you meet Mr. Ford, and I don't know, he seems to be in hiding. Mr. Kenny seems to have taken over our province for the time being. But you might want to remind Mr. Ford of some of these principles, because apparently what he is really interested in are the green spaces in our cities and in our communities. And every time an environmental group slaps him on the wrist and tell him that, no, you can't sell that off to your buddies for building factories and businesses, he pulls his hand back and then he waits until nobody's looking and then he just tries to sneak it in again. So maybe you can help him to remember to protect our green spaces and also to protect our waterways, because I seem to recall the Conservative government in this province fairly recently carving away at a lot of the restrictions to industrial businesses in terms of what they can and can't dump in our water.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht, did you want to respond?
I would just comment that perhaps Mr. Vett could spend a few minutes with Mr. Waller and talk about the differences between federal and provincial politics.
Thank you. Ms. Gertz, did you want to respond to Mr. Albrecht?
Yes. So if you go to ourparliament.ca, you can look at every single party MP, what they've said in Parliament, and our current MP, Harold Albrecht, has spoken regarding the sewage waste into the waterways for a number of years, and I agree with him, that should not happen. Protecting our waterways is extremely important, but he's been talking about it for several years. What action has he actually been doing in order to combat this, to reduce the continued refuge being put under water? But then also, he mentions this happening in Quebec, but he's not talking about the gravel pits that are currently being proposed or thought about locally, so in Shingletown, or in Maryhill, or in Winterbourne. So if he's so important about protecting our waterway and ensuring we have clean water, there's local issues that are currently at the forefront of our clean water.
Mr. Albrecht?
Comment in regards to the development of aggregate mining, if you want to call it that, in terms of gravel pits and that sort of thing. It's important that we are protecting the water quality. And each of the applications that are currently under review are being examined by scientific experts to be sure that any extraction of aggregate will not impact the quality of our water. We all want development, we all want a home to live in, but nobody wants to have that gravel removed from their backyard. So we have to be sure that we're protecting our environment. Absolutely, have scientific studies to make sure that we're not impacting it. But at the same time, we can't stifle development.
Thank you. The Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce has for 20 years led efforts to recruit family doctors into our region. What does your party propose to address the national doctor shortage? We'll begin with Mr. Lewis.
There's a lot to take in, and this is not even our first debate today, so excuse me while I just find...
You're not on the clock yet, so...
Okay, good. Truth be told, I got my first pair of reading glasses and left them in the car.
Vanity.
I won't wear them because I look exactly like my dad when I do. This is being recorded. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. That is a problem. We need to work on getting more family doctors. I know that sometimes you have an issue, you go to your doctor, especially when they maybe refer you to a specialist, and the problem actually clears itself up or gets worse before you get to see somebody. That is not something that we're prepared to do. We have a healthcare system that we need to continually strengthen and support. And I know that a newly elected Liberal government will absolutely ensure that Canadians have access to a family doctor or primary health care team. We're going to work hard with the provinces to add doctors because that's going to make a big difference. We're going to continue to improve access on home care and palliative care. If we can keep people home as long as possible, like I mentioned my mother-in-law before, she's trying to stay at her home as long as possible. The longer we can keep people at home and staying out of that healthcare system, the stronger our healthcare system can be. And also National Pharmacare, again, people should not have to make a decision, can they afford medicine or not? So the short answer is yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Dad.
Mr. Waller?
So on the topic of family doctors, my family was without a family doctor for 3.5 years, and nothing that the Liberal government has done during the current mandate fixed that, and we had to wait for a private clinic to be built at the boardwalk on Iron Needles, and then the doctors moved in there. Fundamentally, it's about attracting the business of doctors, and we need, and as I've said before, lowering the corporate tax would help that as well. We also need to make sure that people who want to move forward in that type of education can do so without breaking the bank, thus lowering the income tax. Another thing that we'd like to do as well is reform the immigration system. So there are several dimensions to this as well, because a lot of the doctors that are now offering their services in Canada are from other countries. So the People's Party of Canada wants to reform our immigration system. Currently, just shy of a quarter of the total number of immigrants that we accept to Canada are in the economic class. So these are the people that we've identified that they have the skills, that they have the ability to integrate into Canada, and that they can find a job easily. The other 76% are dependents, so spouses, grandparents, children, etc. We want to reform this system so that 50%, or just a little bit over, are under that economic class. And we want to prioritize those skills that we need right now rather than bringing in more dependents.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht, national doctor shortage?
When it comes to getting doctors to come to Canada, is certainly one of our desires to see more doctors, but most of that doctor recruitment happens at the local level. So they're recruited into a municipality or they're recruited into a province. One of the commitments that our party has made is clearly to continue to increase the funding for national health care at 3% per year so that the provinces have the funds that they need to be able to support medical care. One of the big things that I think we're failing to do in Canada is to provide adequate palliative care for Canadians who request it and who need palliative care. It's estimated that only about 15% of Canadians who require palliative care are able to access it, especially depending on geography. And if we had hospices and home care available to these patients who are currently occupying acute bed facilities, it would not only open up more opportunity for health care, but would also reduce the cost and at the same time give better care to those patients who require that personal hospice and palliative care.
Thank you. Ms. Gertz?
So we talked about immigration. So a lot of people who are, there are people coming into Canada that have qualifications where they could be a doctor if they met the Canadian qualifications. So the Green Party would like to ensure professionals being considered to have licensing requirements for professionals clearly explained, so that there might be people coming into Canada thinking that they can be a doctor, but not understanding that once they get into Canada, they actually can't qualify to being a doctor in Canada. So we need to ensure that people that we're bringing in have that understanding. We also need to work with professional associations to evaluate education and training credentials of immigrants and compare them with the Canadian standards to increase opportunities. So again, looking at the standards, what qualifications does someone need, and then comparing them with other country regulations and standards to ensure that there's a faster transition into roles that are actually more beneficial for our economy. Another thing that was mentioned to me was allocating greater resources for funding for language training for French and English. So there might be also an issue or problem when we might have people who are qualified to be doctors that can't actually become doctors fully because they don't have a full understanding of the English language. So making sure we give additional funding for that so they can transition over. The other one I just thought about was providing access to education for everyone. So the Green Party believes in free post-secondary education. A lot of the countries around the world would like to have this, have a greater health and abundance and wellness within their country. By giving free post-secondary education, it will allow people who wouldn't normally get into the realm of doctors and nurses to actually go into those fields. Because going away from the university or college with the debt of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 and having that on your shoulders, it would create a real hardship on people actually going into those fields.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette, on the national doctor shortage?
Thank you. Yes, it is a huge problem, and I don't know that anybody has really come forward, including the NDP, with a specific solution that I think is workable, but I think it's definitely something that need to be worked on. And so when I'm not running for political office, I'm also a campaigner for public health care and better access. And so I'm going to use some of that, but also some of my experience working in South Africa, well, growing up and working in South Africa. And also I'm married to a physician who is an international medical graduate, and so I'm going to use some of that to answer the question. So something that was done in South Africa was to say to young doctors when they complete their studies that they had to perform 2-year community service after they completed their studies, and that would take the place of their internship. And they were placed at hospital, or they are placed at hospitals throughout the countries. So some might strike it lucky and get a placement in a big city hospital, but most of them get placement in rural and small town hospitals where they still work under supervision of qualified physicians. So that would be something that we could look at, because we invest, as taxpayers, we invest a lot in our students, and that include medical students. And we do it not just for the sake of that person. We do it because education is supposed to be an investment in our future and our prosperity as a country and as a community. We also have a situation where most doctors in Canada are businesses. And when you run a business, you're looking for profit. So where's the profit? In the big cities and the big towns. They're not in the small rural areas. We have too few doctors on the public payroll. And that could be another thing that we look at, is to have more doctors who work on a public payroll and are placed in hospitals where they are needed, not where they can make the most profit. We also need to look at the issue of registration. Like I mentioned, my husband is an international medical graduate. He's not a family physician, he's a specialist. He was a specialist in anesthesia for 25 odd years, and he has currently been working in the same specialty, but in an ICU, so it's now almost like a dual specialty, for more than 5 years. He's not working in Canada. He works in the United Arab Emirates, and he comes here twice a year on holiday. And the reason he does that is because the registration process in Canada, unless you are a freshly graduated medical student, is a nightmare. It is a test after test after test. It is money upon money upon money. And then even when you have done all those tests and you have jumped through all those hoops, you then have to get a spot in a hospital as a registrar or as a resident. In the case of a specialist, as a registrar. In anesthesia, there are 200 registrar positions per year in Canada. That is a very, very small number. So especially if you are of a certain age, you will never get one of those positions. And so Canada cannot utilize the services of my husband, who has been doing his specialty in the public service, servicing people for 30 years now. And he is not the only one. We need to find a way to streamline that process. And unfortunately, right now, the Royal Colleges of Physicians and Surgeons are holding that process tight with a stranglehold, and I cannot help but think that in their minds it is a question of supply and demand, and if they keep the supply low and the demand high, they can get more money. And we need to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Waller, you wanted to respond to Ms. Gertz?
Yes, so I would like to touch on the point of abolishing post-secondary tuition, because I find that policy to be the most ridiculous one on the Green Party platform besides universal basic income. And it also speaks to me a little bit, as it would be relevant to me if it were implemented. So the average cost of a Bachelor of Arts degree today at Wilfrid Laurier University, for 4 years, you're looking at about $18,500. That's for one person. Wilfrid Laurier University, the Waterloo campus, currently has 5,000 full-time students. So if I can just pull out my phone and do the quick math on there, we can find out what the cost would be for that at Wilfrid Laurier University. 18,500 times 5,000. That is $925 million just for Wilfrid Laurier University. We have over 175 post-secondary institutions in Canada. I find that proposal to be incredibly illogical, and I really wonder where you would get the money from, because abolishing post-secondary tuition, well, I can only assume that the government would pay for that, and where's the government going to get the money from? You're just going to have to raise the taxes.
Ms. Gertz, in response?
Absolutely. So the Green Party platform was one of the first, like I mentioned before, parties to get our platform officially reviewed by the Parliamentary Office. You can visit our website, greenparty.ca, where we have our whole platform costed on an Excel document or on a document. You can outline exactly where we're going to put our money and where we're getting our money from. We're going to be cutting corporate taxes, closing corporate loopholes and tax havens, no longer funding oil and gas companies or giving subsidies to them. We've costed it out. So I don't have the 10 pages worth of notes of exactly where we're going to get that money from. However, it is online, and you can see where we're going to get our money from.
Mr. Waller, quickly? Yeah,
I'll just follow up with that quickly. I did look at the PPO costing for that specific policy, and it came out to $22.5 billion a year. Mm-hmm. And the Liberal government is, if they win again, they're projected to be adding about that amount every year to the deficit. So with that plan, you'd just be doubling that.
Thank you. As you know, public transit is a major issue for all municipalities across Waterloo Region and Canada. All-day two-way GO passenger service is critical for the Toronto-Waterloo Region corridor. Do you support this goal, and will you work with the Connect the Corridor Coalition to make this happen? Mr. Waller, we'll begin with you.
Pardon?
We'll begin with you on the two-way all-day GO question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you support this goal of two-way all-day GO passenger service, and will you work with the Connect the Corridor Coalition to make it happen?
That sounds to me like a provincial or a municipal jurisdiction question. Personally, I think it would be a good initiative, but that would probably have to be handled at the provincial and municipal level.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Albrecht?
I would absolutely support all-day, two-way GO to and from the GTA. I was also very honored to support the LRT funding in the region. I believe it's very important on a number of issues to get people out of cars, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the pressure on developing our greenland or our green spaces, to have more intensification of building downtown. So the federal government, under our government when we were in power, invested $265 million in the LRT. And to address Mr. Waller, generally these types of major projects are shared at 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So 1/3 from the federal government, 1/3 from the province, and 1/3 from the local municipality. So that was the beginning step of providing transportation within Waterloo Region. But now we need to go to the next step and provide a link that will link Kitchener-Waterloo area to the GTA and provide more rapid, more frequent, more reliable service between here and the GTA.
Thank you. Ms. Gertz?
Yes, last week, all the Waterloo Region Greens across Waterloo Region met with Big Cities Mayor's Caucus and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to discuss this very issue. We talked about transportation. Green transportation is extremely important when reducing our amount of carbon that's being released. The Green Transportation Plan, or the Greens have a transportation plan that'll put $600 million by 2021, raising it to $720 million by 2030 to develop regional rail networks and strengthen rail connections, and building high-speed rail among that between Toronto, Ottawa, and Quebec, which obviously would be going towards Waterloo Region, and Sudbury is also another connection that the municipal mayors are looking at.
Thank you. Ms. Yvette?
Thank you. Yes, it's absolutely something that the NDP supports. When we have good transit, it leads to good jobs, and it leads to stronger, healthier communities, and it leads to more economic activity. Municipalities are already doing a lot to make our cities and the transit system in our cities greener and cleaner. And by adding the provincial rail networks, that will also help tremendously. So we would definitely be helping with the funding there, and supporting the efforts and trying to speed it up, because honestly, for as long as I've lived in this region, I keep hearing about the two-way transit, and it just, we see these small incremental increases from time to time, but we're still a long way to go. So I hope in my lifetime, which is why we really need an NDP government to make sure it happens. But we also had a meeting with the mayor. And one of the things we discussed is that for cities and transit, one of the problems they have is that the funding they get from the province and from the federal government, it's sometimes not very dependable. And so what we have said is that we will commit to a long-term funding so that cities know that they will get that amount year after year after year, and they don't start planning something and then just suddenly have the rug pulled from under them, as we have seen happening elsewhere in our province with cities when suddenly funding isn't provided that previously was promised. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Having the rug pulled, as you said, has been a problem lately with our provincial government. I'm very proud that the Liberal government since 2015 has invested more than $180 billion in total infrastructure spending, and out of that, $28 billion is going to public transit all across Canada. We know we need to move people. It's good for business. It's good for the environment. I do support two-way all-day-go transit, absolutely, and one of the ways the federal government can do that is, if necessary, well, we have working directly with the municipalities. It's the municipalities that know, we know the projects here, including this building here that's got funding. We know where the funding needs to go. And so one of the ways that the federal government can help out directly with municipalities is we've doubled the gas tax transfer. That means that goes right to the municipalities. They can decide where they're getting that money. Re-elected government is going to actually reaffirm that commitment and increase that gas tax fund, and that's going to increase the money we have here to make the decisions we need to locally. But we need to work together with municipalities. I guess the mayor was busy because he met with the Liberal Party as well. So, but the short answer is absolutely, we support a two-way all-day-go train.
Thank you. Mr. Waller, I'd just like to follow up with you after hearing from Mr. Albrecht on how the funding works. Would your party support that if they formed government, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3?
Jurisdiction is a hill that I'm willing to die on. I cannot say that we would fully commit to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I would have to see the full costing for that two-way all-day transit first before I would be willing to support that unequivocally. However, I can say with a project of that scope and magnitude, the federal government should have a place in funding that. But I don't believe that we should be sticking our noses so much into that.
Okay, thank you. A major concern for all municipalities across Canada is affordable and low-income housing. What do you propose to address these problems? We'll begin with Mr. Albrecht.
I would say that the issue of affordability has probably been the one that is raised most frequently within the riding when we go door to door and in our office. The issue of housing affordability specifically as it relates to some of the recent changes to the mortgage rules that have been implemented by the Liberal government. The introduction of the stress test to qualify for a mortgage has made it virtually impossible for young home buyers to buy their first home. In fact, it's made it impossible for some people to transition out of one home, apply for a mortgage in another home, even though their financial situation has not changed. The stress test has added an extra obstacle in their way to be able to afford that home. So we need to do everything we can to remove this idea that one size fits all across the country. We have Vancouver, we have Toronto, we have Montreal, major markets, and they need to be addressed. But those stress test applications that are applied to mortgages should not apply in situations like Elmira or in different areas of Kitchener-Conestoga. So anything we can do to reduce the availability of housing by mortgages has to be improved. When it comes to providing social housing, affordability is again a big issue, but affordability is not simply on housing. It's fine to purchase a home or provide a home for someone on low income. But when you add a carbon tax to that, when you add all kinds of other taxation levels to the cost of living for that person or that couple or that family, it does nothing to improve the idea that you can have a home that you can maintain and sustain for the long term.
Thank you. Ms. Gertz?
Affordability of living, affordability of housing, it's a very complex issue, very complex topic. It has to do with where else are you spending your money? If you can't afford a house, it's because are you spending money in other ways that is draining your income? Are you spending money on your on medications for Pharmacare? Are you trying to pay off your bills, your educational bills that you've racked up, $20,000, $30,000, which I've met another mother the other day at the Early Learning and Children's Forum. And she's a grandmother now. She's spent a number of years, and they've been docking her pay. But now she's actually been diagnosed with a severe disease, and now can no longer work. And now she's not sure how she's going to pay that money that's been docked off her pay, while also trying to pay for the medication that she now has to pay for because of her illness. So it's everything around how close are our food networks? What are you buying for food? How much is your electricity? So the Green Party would like to do a retrofit housing. In order to decrease the cost of utilities on homes, we would also like to change the building codes to net zero, which would make the utility costs are just pocket change. We would also like to increase public transportation, so again, reducing the need for buying a vehicle because you can actually take public transportation between work and home.
Thank you. Ms. DeVette.
Thank you. So the New Deal for People of the NDP is looking at providing 500,000 units of quality and affordable housing across the country. This will be done where we're looking at providing the first half of that within the first 4 years of being in office, and then the rest in the next 6 years. We're also looking at providing an immediate relief to renters with a rental benefit of up to $5,000. We want to reintroduce the 30-year mortgage packages, which will, especially for first-time homeowners, give them the ability to have a bit of a smaller repayment, and a first-time home buyer's tax credit of $1,500. But there's also, a lot of this will help people in low-income categories, but I'm also talking to a lot of people in the middle class who might not necessarily benefit from these, but they are surely feeling the cost of the housing prices going up and up and up. And so we will be looking at having a foreign buyers tax across the country to try and cut down on speculation in the home market, because that is driving up a lot of the prices. So if people are not citizens and they're also not residents of the country, but they're owning 5 houses, that's speculation happening. And then the other thing that we realize we really need to fight and tighten the grip on is money laundering. There is money being laundered through the property market, and that too is driving the prices up, and it's making it unaffordable for young people or for anybody moving into a new area to purchase a house.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Yes, quite similar to what you just mentioned, that the foreign speculation is a topic that is of mind, and the Liberal government, a newly elected one, will address the impact of foreign speculation and make sure we put a stop to that. I'm proud of our government. We launched Canada's first ever national housing strategy. We've got a 10-year plan that's going to help more than 600,000 Canadians find a safe, affordable places to live. Our goal in 10 years is to reduce homelessness by 50%. These are goals that we're setting. But I also agree with Ms. Gertz. It's a holistic approach. We need to make sure that people, especially middle class, or even people working hard to be in the middle class, can get help with the cost of living. For seniors, it means that we're going to increase the OAS after 74 years old. We're increasing the guaranteed income supplement on single seniors. We want to make sure that people can stay in their homes as long as possible, especially in our small towns, in our communities like this. We've also said that we're going to create a national Canada housing benefit that will help 300,000 Canadians with the high cost of rent. So we're hearing a lot of the similar ideas from some of these parties, which is an encouraging thing. So I'm happy that so many of us agree.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
So I am going to apologize in advance because my answer to this question is the same as a couple of others. The policies of the Liberal, NDP, and the Greens constitute a ridiculous amount of government intervention. The housing market is one of the largest markets in this country, and the level of intervention that they are proposing would throw it completely out of whack. Every time that the government gets involved in markets, it's always inefficient, bureaucratic, and over budget. So the plan to build 500,000 housing units that are affordable, a commendable initiative. How much is it going to cost, and how are you going to do it on budget, on time, and efficiently? The key to making housing more affordable is to let people keep their money in their pockets. So I'm going to reiterate our tax plan, specifically income, raising the exemption to $15,000, a 15% rate for income between $15,000 and $100,000, and 25% rate for all income over $100,000. We're also going to remove the carbon tax completely, which is something that the Conservative Party has tried to conceal. They are still going to keep the carbon tax, but they will rename it carbon pricing and instead take the money and give it to corporations to develop high-tech, clean technologies to reduce their emissions. At least under the Liberal plan, you get some of that money back in a rebate. With the Conservative plan, you wouldn't see any of that money back at all. So when it comes to housing, it really comes down to letting the builders build the homes, and we're seeing a great explosion in South Kitchener right now, but also not giving it back, but letting people keep their money in the first place so they can afford this.
Thank you. Canada needs immigration to fuel our economic prosperity. There are literally thousands of jobs unfilled in Waterloo Region as we speak. If elected, will you support policies that enable more employers to hire more immigrants suited to their positions faster? And how will you support immigrants already in the community to find work? Ms. Gertz, we'll begin with you.
Absolutely. So this is what I kind of mentioned at the last one regarding doctors and jobs. So I don't want to, I'll restate some of it, but basically, yes, we totally agree with that. We totally agree with ensuring professionals have considered their licensing before they come into Canada to ensure that they meet their qualifications, that we work with professional associations to evaluate educational standards so that they can match educational standards locally. We'll advocate for working with municipalities and provinces to improve integration of families so that more people would like to come to Canada, because integration into Canada is, I guess, easier for them. So I guess my answer would be just clear yes.
Thank you. Ms. Devet?
Thank you. I think in our own region, we have welcomed so many refugees. And many of you sitting here have met with these refugees, and some of you have probably provided housing and assistance to them. And I think everyone who has will agree that the benefits of having them in our country by far outweigh any of the negatives. They are a wonderful addition, and they provide such depth and interest, and they just make us better people and more aware of ourselves, but also of the world around us. And so, even as we're sitting here at this table, 2 of the candidates here are immigrants to this country. And I think Tim and I can both attest to the warmth that we were welcomed with. And the fact that we can sit here as candidates in a federal election really speaks to who and what we are as Canadians. But we also know that we have immigrants in our country who have been separated from their families, who maybe have elderly parents or uncles or aunts, but especially parents living abroad. And at the time that I immigrated to Canada was under the previous Conservative government, and they had just suspended the family immigration system, the extended family immigration system. So I could not bring my mother with me. And I'm sorry, she passed away about a year later, and I wish I could have spent more time with her. So there are a lot of families who are affected by that, and we will make a conscientious effort to make sure that families can be reunited with their loved ones. We will also help immigrants to be incorporated into the economic aspects of our country in a faster way by assisting them in improving foreign credential recognition, so that people don't have to come here and then struggle through bureaucracy and having to pay money and more money and more money to have their credentials certified and recertified and cross-referenced and notarized, but to just make sure they have the credentials, but do it in a quick and streamlined process. And then we will also do our fair share to welcome refugees fleeing violence and persecution. And I often hear people talking about people jumping the line or illegally crossing, and they're like, well, you're an immigrant, you went through all the legal processes, you should agree. Well, I don't. I am so privileged that I was never in a position where I had to fear for the safety of my children or myself or my husband. Because if I was worried about the safety of my children, I would have crossed any border illegally if I had to. And the idea that people just willy-nilly pick up their children and walk thousands of miles to cross a border illegally, it is a great fear-mongering tactic, but anybody who sits and thinks about it for more than 5 minutes will realize just how ridiculous that is. When people come knocking on our doors because they claim refugee status, we have a process, and that process starts by inviting them in, telling them to sit down and tell us their story, which we will then check and corroborate and make sure that they are who they claim they are. And if they are, then we will give them refuge. And if they are not, then we will say, we're very sorry, but you cannot stay, and we will let them go. It is not a free-for-all. It's not like the doors are open and just come and make yourself at home. But we will never, ever shut the door on somebody who claims they are in crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
What she said. You got to call it when you got to call it, like who's got to go next. You're looking at 2 people who are immigrants to Canada. This is what immigration can look like. We have people from all walks of life here. I came to this country, I was accepted, I fell in love with a girl, that's how I got here, and then I fell in love with the country enough to become a Canadian citizen. one of the things that I imagine maybe all of us can say, when we're out knocking on doors in our communities, we get to see people from all walks of life and all countries. And there is no, this is what a Canadian looks like. It is amazing to see. In 2015, when we brought in the refugees from Syria, some of the church groups, I went to the meetings and talked to them, how much work you all did to bring these families in, how much it took to, out of your time, your lives, and how much you helped these people welcome to our society. And everyone stayed friends. They're friends now, and that's a wonderful thing we're sharing. We've got Thanksgiving coming up, and they brought people into your holidays. It's a wonderful experience. It's what makes Canada stronger. I'm proud that our government has done so much to help immigration, keep it fair, keep it simple, but make sure that everyone in the world, and especially in these times when people are closing walls and borders and building walls, that Canada remains a beacon of light, that we can come here. We just need to keep working on, we've cut citizenship time in half, which means that it takes less time. We're working on bringing times down for reunification. And one of the things is there's a bit of a cost barrier. That one of the proposed ideas we have is we're going to make people that are applying for Canadian citizenship free for permanent residence. That shouldn't be, I can't afford to become a Canadian. So that's in our platform, and I sit here as a proud Canadian.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
I hate to deflate the good feelings, but I would like to provide some concrete information about our immigration system. Speaking specifically on refugees, yes, refugees who are fleeing war or persecution, the People's Party would prioritize them. When it comes to the 47,000 plus people who have come across the Canadian border from the United States, no, we would not accept that. And yes, it is a free-for-all in another sense, because when somebody goes through the interview to apply for refugee status and they are rejected, it's not as though they, go home. They can they can appeal that indefinitely. There are people who crossed the border at Roxham Road 2 years ago and have gone through over 6 interviews because they keep appealing indefinitely. And what that allows them to do is then, where are they housed? Well, then they are housed in the big cities, and they're provided government-paid food, water, and in some cases smartphones as well. So the People's Party would eliminate that. We would fence off the problem areas. And no, that is not Trumpian, as some people would like to say. Specifically speaking about the immigration system, though, so those who do go through the process to become an immigrant, we would like to lower the amount from what it's currently set at 330,000 immigrants a year to between 100 and 150,000 immigrants per year. Because right now, Canada is accepting more immigrants per capita than any other Western nation in the world, including the United States. Compared to our population, we are taking in about 0.9% of our population every year. The United States, for example, even though they take in 1 million immigrants a year, that only amounts to about 0.3% of their total population. When you are inviting that sheer amount of people into Canada, it's extremely hard to find work, housing, and to integrate properly. So we would lower the numbers and we would prioritize the economic immigrants who would like to come to Canada, as they have the skills and qualifications that are necessary to fit into Canada immediately. Like Mrs. DeVette, educated and smart, and Mr. Tim Lewis, also educated and smart, and he's a great musician as well. That's our plan.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht?
One of the joys of my current work as a member of Parliament for Kitchener-Conestoga is to attend new citizenship ceremonies where those who are taking the oath of citizenship raise their hand and declare their allegiance to Canada. And to think about the variety of stories that each of them could tell is incredible. We also follow up with each of the citizens the new citizens from Kitchener-Conestoga with a congratulatory letter and a certificate of welcome to our riding. And then we also follow up with an invitation to come to our office for coffee and cookies about 3 or 4 times a year we do this. And we never have a large group come out, but we can have anywhere from 10 to 20 people show up. And when these new immigrants come together in that environment and share their stories with each other and with us, it's an incredible joy. When it comes to refugees, I want to make the case very clear that we want a system that is fair and orderly and compassionate. But when it comes to the Roxham Road situation, we would close the safe third country agreement, close the border on that, because currently there is no one in upstate New York that is experiencing persecution. We would focus on private sponsorships of refugees. We have personally in our family had the honor and the joy of sponsoring refugees who lived in our home. We were able to find them employment, find them housing, find them OHIP coverage, and all of the things that are necessary to integrate into Canadian life. And the joy of that, and as Mr. Vet said, the joy that we got out of it was more than we were helping the family themselves. So we would continue to focus on that, but focus on helping that new immigrant family, especially refugees, to become aware of the current culture around us, to acclimatize, to get the education they need, the English language training or French language training, so they're able to actually succeed. And the stats are clear that when you have private sponsorship refugees, those refugees do far better in the long term than those who are brought in large groups without private sponsorships to go along with it.
Thank you. Does your party support the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement, and are you ready to ratify immediately? We'll begin with Mr. Vet.
No. I'm going to start off by answering about trade agreements more broadly. I think international trade agreements are great. I think they're a fantastic idea. Here's what I don't like about them. When we talk or read in the newspapers about the benefits and the successes of these agreements, it's always framed in the context of, oh, you know, Canada got the upper hand, or the US is coming out stronger from this, or Mexico. That's rubbish. There's no one country that benefits more than another country in these things. Every country is going to feel that they came out a little bit worse, they gave up a little bit more. The reality is that who comes out on top are the big corporations, the multinationals. Who comes out at the bottom? Regular people. Doesn't matter which country you're from. These agreements are made to benefit big corporations. They are not made to benefit us. This agreement is no different than any other in that respect. At the end, the big corporations win and we do not. So the NDP is not happy with the agreement. We will take a position. We're going to see what the Democratic Party in the House decide to do with it when they finally look at it, whether they're going to ratify it or not. And based on that, we will decide how we go ahead with it. But no, we are not happy with it. We would like to see these agreements benefit real people as much as corporations are benefiting. And a specific example I want to raise, we spoke a lot about taxation earlier. The tax rate of big corporations in Canada is a lot lower than in the US. I think about 6% lower than corporations in the US. So they're really getting a great deal of benefit. Plus, they don't even have to pay the high cost associated with health care for their employees that employers in the US have to pay. But yet, whenever we even hint at raising corporate taxes, and I don't mean taxes for small businesses, I mean these big billion-dollar profit-making corporations, their first position is, well, if you do that, we're going to move to another country. So that's blackmail. So how about when we look at these trade agreements, we also build in provisions between the partners in that agreement to stop corporations from trying to play us off one against the other. Well, if you raise the taxes here, we're going to move to Mexico. And in the meantime, they're telling Mexico if they raise the taxes, they're going to move to the US. Let's just put a baseline in and say, well, you know, we're not going to stand for this. We all agree to not drop our taxes below that for big corporations, and if they decide to pack up their things and move to another country, if they're in the partnership, there will be penalties attached to it. But we need to start making sure that these agreements work for people as much as they work for corporations. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Well, trade with other nations is important for Canadians, for Canada, and free trade does have benefits. We are the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with all of the other free trade countries. We've also successfully negotiated NAFTA. We're in CPTPP and the European Union. And we just finished the new NAFTA. I'm not sure what we're calling it these days. But I have to give credit where credit is due. When Canadians come together, we can rally and do this. There was cooperation from other parties. It was not, I can't say just the Liberal government did this. There were other parties involved. There were people from all walks of life at this negotiation. I spoke with Chrystia Freeland not that long ago, and she explained that to me. She said how Canadian politicians rallied together to make sure we got a good deal for Canadians. It was Rona Ambrose was one of the people that was on that panel. She said people from different walks of life, Indigenous peoples, other parties, and together Canadians negotiated with the United States. And it's amazing to hear that. When we cooperate and work together for Canada, we can get more done. So free trade is important, and like I said, Canada will keep trading with the world. By making that agreement and these agreements we have, we've opened up our market to 1.5 billion new customers.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
When it comes to free trade, the People's Party is a staunch defender of it, because free trade not only benefits all consumers, but it also helps keep the peace in the world. Research has shown that countries that trade at high levels with each other are less likely to engage in military conflict with each other. So that's something we should consider with nations that are currently opposed to us dialectically. I would like to touch on how free trade benefits the corporations, but it doesn't benefit regular people. That's wrong. Here's the fact. Everything that you find in the supermarket or the store, wherever you go, and it's not made in Canada, the reason why it's there at an affordable price is because a free trade agreement allowed it to get there, because it was cost effective for the producer to ship it to that store, and because the store owner believes that they can sell it at a reasonable price. You can't do that without free trade. When it comes to CUSMA, the People's Party would ratify it for the time being, because of course these things take a very long time to hash out, so we're not just going to go without a free trade agreement with the United States for however long. They are our largest trading partner, so we would ratify it for the time being. However, speaking specifically on the provision about the corporations and their taxation rate and them moving offshore, they can just move outside of that trade agreement, you know? Oh, they don't have to just go to Mexico, they can just go to Asia like they do. They can just maneuver around that completely. So that provision falls completely flat. We are staunch defenders of free trade, and I believe that it is one of the greatest agents of peace and prosperity in the world. And the People's Party will seek out free trade deals with every single country that is willing to accept one.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht?
Thank you. When it comes to free trade, I think the track record of the Conservative Party on negotiating free trade agreements is one of great success. While it is true that the Liberal government did sign the final documents, it was largely Minister Ed Fast, our Minister of International Trade, who negotiated those agreements. When it comes to USMCA agreement, I think without question, we could have a better agreement had we stayed with the original NAFTA. I don't think there was any real need for Canada to jump in front of the issue of renegotiating NAFTA. Currently, we have still small businesses and manufacturers in the Waterloo region who are being hurt because of the current situation. The uncertainty is the primary cause of the pain for our local manufacturers. The tariffs that were on for a long time throughout the summer hurt our manufacturers incredibly. And in addition to that, we have sold out a large portion of our agricultural commodities to the U.S. when it comes to the dairy, the pork, the beef, and even our grain and oilseed sector. So while we don't have much choice in terms of ratifying it, provided the U.S. does ratify it, it's not as good as it could have been, and I think we shouldn't have opened it up in the first place so willingly, as our Prime Minister basically jumped in front of a gun that wasn't pointed at him.
Thank you. Ms. Gertz?
The Green Party believes in increasing food sustainability and locally. We believe that local areas should be producing local food and we should be consuming more local food. So for example, So for example, we'd like to set targets to replace a third of Canada's food imports with a domestic production, increasing regional food self-reliance, and returning $15 billion back into our economy. We want to assist in reestablishing the infrastructure for local food production in canneries, slaughterhouses, and other value-added food processing. We want to protect supply management systems, which will allow production for local markets outside of the system. But when we talk about trade, we do agree that we need to be talking with, sorry, go back to my page. We want to facilitate a global effort to reform the World Trade Organization, building a general agreement on tariffs and trades, but this has to be negotiated.
Thank you. Now we'll begin with closing remarks from the candidates. 1 minute maximum. It's the reverse of original rotation, and we'll begin with Stephanie Gertz.
Thank you. So I've been, for the last couple months, for about 6 months or now, I've been door knocking. I've been talking to a lot of people in our riding. A lot of people believe that this is a very conservative riding, but what I have found is that only about 10% of people have actually said they're going to vote conservative. The rest of people are undecided. Either they're conservative and they can't go vote conservative anymore, or they're liberal and they can't vote liberal anymore. The green is actually a good option, that we're fiscally positive or fiscally responsible. That values that, so conservatives value that part, but we're also very socially positive, which the Liberals and NDPs align with. We need to act now. We need to act very decisively. Countries all over around the world are moving forward, not only in clean technology, but creating more sustainable environments. Green Party doesn't believe in working against each other, but with each other. We don't have a party whip, which means I can work with NDPs, Liberals, or Conservatives in order to make sure that whatever policies that are implemented actually make sense for our riding. It's not about me aligning with my party. It's about me working with the people here and making sure I have the most impact.
Thank you. Mr. Albrecht.
This election is about one thing, making sure that life in Canada is more affordable. Over the past 4 years, I've met with small business owners, farmers, mortgage brokers, new Canadians, seniors, young parents, many of you. I've listened as you've shared your stories with me, and I'm concerned about the direction Canada is heading. Increased taxes, out-of-control spending, unbelievably large deficits. Enough is enough. Canada is at a turning point. Do we want to continue to go down the uncertain and dangerous road of never-ending deficits? Do we want to re-elect a government that is so plagued with scandals and corruption? Our positive conservative vision for Canada means a responsible 5-year plan back to balance, bringing ethics and accountability back into decision-making, ending corporate welfare for the wealthy and well-connected, and leaving more money in your pocket. It's time for you to get ahead. I'm Harold Albrecht, and I'm asking for your vote on October 21 to continue the experienced leadership in Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you. Mr. Waller.
Well, I'd just like to start off by saying thank you to my fellow candidates. This is now perhaps our 4th meeting together, and it just gets better and better every time. I'd also like to thank everybody for coming out. It's really great to see such a big crowd, and it's a great privilege for me, but also the People's Party, because we're just over a year old, but we're already seeing a lot of interest in what we've got on the table. I attempted, and I hope I succeeded, in explaining our economic policies, but also some others today. And if you'd like to know more about things that we didn't touch on today, you can find us online at thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca, and you can find me online as well, and you can send me a message or an email anytime that you'd like, and I can clarify something for you. The People's Party of Canada believes that economic activity is of paramount importance, and it's perhaps the #1 priority that this country needs to abide by. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, and I hope you were engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
Well, again, thank you for hosting this, and thank you for the Chamber, and thank you guys for participating in democracy. That's a long time to sit there and listen to a bunch of politicians, I can say that. But you did a wonderful job, and I thank you so much for that. I'm just going to speak for the heart for a minute. I'll leave you with the number 251. That's the amount of votes that I fell short in the last election, and from being the seated member. I never think about it unless. unless I'm awake or asleep. That's it, just all those two things. But you know what? Having to sit it out for 4 years, there's two ways you could do it. You could sit out and try and come back, but I stayed engaged. I loved our community in 2015. I got to meet so many people, and so I've been out at these events. And at Flipping Pancakes, we have the absolute worst pancake flipping team in all of Elmira. I don't think we've won a round yet. You guys almost won, so. It's the communities that make this riding, and each of the communities have their own different personality, but together, Kitchener-Conestoga, this rural divide we have, I'll put up to one of the best ridings in the country. So I have been working hard, I've been engaged, I've been listening to you. A lot of people out there feel like their voices are not being heard and they're not being represented. I do want to change that. I want to represent everyone, not just people that believe in what I believe in. So I ask you to consider on October 21st, please vote Tim Lewis.
Thank you. And Ms. Devet.
Thank you very much. When I started off, I spoke about knocking on doors and people sharing some of their hardships and the problems they have with affording things. People work hard, but they feel that they're not making progress. They look at their children growing up and they've realized that there's not much hope that their children are going to have life much better than what they have it. And we've been listening to a lot of discussion on taxation, as if taxation is the big thing that's holding us back. It isn't. Taxes is not money that the government steals from us. There are savings that can be made in terms of how our taxes are spent, definitely. But those savings should never be off the services that we rely on to make our lives a little bit better. So when we pay taxes, we are paying to put out fires. We are paying to keep ourselves, our streets, and our community safe. We are paying for education, we are paying for healthcare, we are paying for safe food and water, for legal safeguards for businesses and for employees. We are paying to have parks, we are paying to build roads and railways and bridges and ports and airports. We are paying to have the infrastructure that we depend on both in our houses and in our businesses to supply water and electricity and to remove effluent. We are paying to patrol our borders, we are paying to aid to the international stability and goodwill that allow Canadians to travel safely abroad and allow our business community to engage in trade all over the world. That is why we pay taxes. So what is the problem? What is holding us back? Last week, Canada Canada Statistics released the following figures. In 2017, the average income of Canadians increased by 2.4%. That was the average for everybody. For Canadians who earn more than $400,000 a year, their income increased by 8%. Canadians who are in the top 1% of income earners had their income increase by 16%. And those in the top 0.1% saw an increase in their annual income of 28%. So when we want to talk about affordability and what is holding us back, can we please stop talking about taxes? That is not what is making life unaffordable. Life is unaffordable because the ones at the top, those 1%ers and 0.1%ers, are hoarding all the money at the expense of everybody else.